I want to introduce our board member and chair of our program committee, Jackie Wolcott. She's a career diplomat. She was most recently the ambassador to the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. Thank you, Jackie.
Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to introduce today, on behalf of the Women's Republican Club of Naples Federated, a true homegrown Naples success story. Our Collier County Manager and keynote speaker, Ms. Amy Patterson. As the first woman to serve in this huge position, she oversees $1.8 billion in budget and has more than 2,100 employees. I just drove back from the East Coast yesterday afternoon, and I was struck by how huge this county is. And I looked it up, and I guess it's the biggest landmass of any county, although I think Palm Beach is up there. So it's a huge county. Born and raised here in Naples, Ms. Patterson began her Collier County career in 2000 as a job bank employee in the growth management department. Working her way up, she served in many capacities, building her expertise and experience as fiscal impact fee analyst, impact fee coordinator, and director of capital project planning, impact fees, and program management. Beginning in May 2021, she served as deputy county manager and was named acting county manager in 2022. And in June of last year, she was unanimously selected as Collier County Manager, just in time for Hurricane Ian. So we are grateful for this opportunity to hear her unique perspective on Collier County from the inside for many years on the key issues facing it and us. Please join me in warmly welcoming County Manager Patterson.
Well, good afternoon. Again, I'm Amy Patterson. I'm so happy to be here, and happy centennial year to everybody. For those of you that participated or are going to participate in this upcoming year, we have a lot of activities planned and are really excited for meeting this historic time. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then we can talk about some of the big issues that probably interest you in this room and us as a community. And I want to jump pretty quickly to your questions because, everybody has questions about traffic and how's it going after Hurricane Ian and traffic and some more traffic. So let me tell you a little about myself. I was born here in Collier County. I've lived here nearly my entire life. I come from a family of educators that worked for the Collier County public school system. My dad was a high school principal for most of my life. He now lives in Jacksonville, but he was actually notably a high school principal at the Everglades, actually the principal at the Everglades City School back in the 70s, pretty interesting. And then a year after Laley High School opened, he moved over there and was a principal at Laley until the early 90s. Both my sisters and my brothers also are graduates of the Collier County public school system, and my entire family still lives here in Collier County. Even though they attempted to move away occasionally, they've all come back. So I started at the county in 2000 as a job banker, which was pretty interesting. They asked me when I was looking for a job, I spent a year and a half at the school board. As you can imagine, coming from a family of educators, I was pushed over towards thinking I might want to be a teacher. Not so much. And but I thought it would be a good idea to go try the county. Somebody said, well, the county's always hiring. You could get a job there. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I went into HR. I had applied for a whole bunch of jobs, not knowing anything about what I was doing. Like probably now you could look back and laugh at the jobs that I applied for. I knew nothing. HR said, well, we have a job bank, and that gave us internally the ability to have people sort of on call. So you could go do something for a few weeks when somebody might have been out on vacation or were out on a sick leave. And they gave me two choices. I could be a receptionist with some light filing duties, or I could be a secretary. So I said, well, I'm not a secretary. I can barely type, so forget that. I'll try this receptionist with light filing. Well, for any of you that have been in Collier County for a while or ever have been over at the building department, in the year 2000, we were experiencing rapid growth. And we have a records room over there. I don't know if anybody's ever been to the records room, but it's where all of the building permit files and land use files go after they've moved through the process to be stored. Well, at that time, what the folks were doing, because there was so much work and so few people, they had those large moving boxes, and they would take the day's work permit, and this was paper now, so we weren't all electronic. They would clip it together and they'd throw it in a box. And there were these boxes all around this room. And then sometimes some of the staff, like me, would be told, okay, well, you can work on that box, go file. And so you'd spend all day just trying to put these building permit files away. It was horrible. Sorry. So now you're going to figure out how horrible it was that when my boss, who ran that section, and some others came over and said, hey, come with me. We're going to put you in impact fees. I was like, great. Yeah. Okay. So I spent the next 14 years in impact fees. Impact fees, for those of you that don't know, are one-time assessments on new construction, both residential and commercial, that fund infrastructure. We have 12 different impact fees in Collier County. It's nearly $100 million revenue source for the fire district, school district, and Collier County. So these beautiful roads, a good portion of the growth schools, parks, those you can thank impact fees for, and you can thank our nice low millage rate also for that addition by the impact fee program. Moving on from there quickly, I ran the capital project group for 6 years. That consisted of stormwater, transportation planning, impact fees, pollution control, and coastal zone management, including beach tree nourishment. Moved to the county manager's office as a deputy, and here's where my story gets really funny. Commissioner Solis, when he was leaving the board, told a funny story about his time. He came in with a hurricane, which was Hurricane Irma. 2 years of red tide after Hurricane Irma, we remember that. 2 years of pandemic, 2 years plus of pandemic, and he was leaving on a hurricane. So, and I was like, well, wait a second. I came up to the county manager's office. I was there for a little while as a deputy. I had another deputy with me. I called my co-deputy. He got fired. Then my boss quit. Then I became the acting county manager. I was chosen as county manager, and then we had a hurricane. So things are starting well for me. But with that, it's really exciting. We're looking at really great staff. What a wonderful community. Lived here my whole life, but really looking at collaborating with the community in a different way. Pandemic was hard on everybody, hard on our businesses, hard on our residents, hard on the world. And we're really looking to get back like we are here, to get back out into the public, to be able to communicate and share information, and to gather your thoughts on where we're going for the future. It's incredibly important. We do a lot of things as local government that I think people are largely unaware of or don't realize that they are welcome to have a role. We're right now deep into budget, and we'll have budget workshops in June. And the number of people that show up to budget workshops is usually 0. Last year we had a couple because we had a pretty good increase in taxable value. So we had a few people come in saying, whoa, I can't believe how much my taxes went up. They also were people that own multi-million-dollar homes, so that was an aside. But you don't get a lot of involvement in that process, and it would be nice to have people be involved, to really participate and understand of that $1.8 billion budget. Where does all that money go? And how much of that money is truly discretionary when we're really looking at the things that we have to do, looking at the money we can't touch as it's in restricted use funds or segregated into enterprise funds, all of the money that goes to public safety, which is the most important thing that we do. And then other health safety things like water quality, water and sewer, incredibly important. So that's not money that's going to be pulled away either. So you're looking at the slice of our budget getting smaller and smaller that's truly discretionary. And then how are those dollars spent? We also plan through an annual update and inventory report every year, which is a 5-year snapshot on our capital improvement program. Even less people show up to that, which, as you can imagine, it's not the most interesting. However, truly can show that I didn't just wake up today and decide to build a road. There's a lengthy process that happens with that. Planning for years, 7 to 10 years to plan a road. So that Vanderbilt Beach Road extension that's happening now, a $150 million project, has been years and years and years in the making. It was actually stopped because of the recession and then picked back up. But even before that, it was years of planning, and it appeared for the very first time years ago in the what we call the AUIR, and that represents all categories of infrastructure. So you don't have to sit through the meetings, but if anybody here is interested in looking at where infrastructure is going, what we're planning, that is a great way. That document is also the preparatory document for our capital improvement element. Those are what we call the Category A facilities, things like water, sewer, transportation, parks, solid waste, stormwater. They all appear in our comprehensive plan. So there's levels of service tied to these, and it's actually, if you're a super government nerd like me, it's pretty fascinating. For just even citizens and residents here, it's a way to know what's going on and what's going where and what we think is going to happen out there on the infrastructure front. So speaking of infrastructure, let's talk about the Army Corps of Engineers before we hop on over to what's going on after Hurricane Ian. How many of you have seen the drawings or cartoons of the giant flood walls? Yep. Okay, so for those of you that haven't, there's passing around out there on social media and other places, renderings of humongous storm walls, flood walls, all up and down the coast. So I want to tell you that that's not something that's happening. That's not something that's happening tomorrow or anytime soon. There was the Corps process. The Army Corps of Engineers was invited into Collier County. It actually took 15 plus years of our coastal zone group trying to get the Corps re-engaged back in Collier County after we turned them away the last time in the 90s, to look at our beaches. What could be done with the beaches? For resilience, higher, wider beaches, enhanced dune structures, any suite of things, also back bay protections. So a whole host of things that the Corps would come in, and they do this all over the country as well as all over the state of Florida. So this process picked up and culminated in 2021 with a report that did include things like flood walls and floodgates, but it was never finalized. We had a lot of citizen opposition to that process, but secondly, it came to pass that not only was the Corps struggling with the cost-benefit analysis that goes along with this 3-year, $3 million study paid for by the Corps, but there were environmental factors that needed to be relooked at. So the Corps took a pause, and it was good for the community because the community wanted it. And they have come back and re-engaged with us starting this past fall. They said, we'd like you to consider another 3 years and another $3 million on the Corps to relook at this. We've heard you. We understand that some of the hardened features is not something that your county's interested in, but we want to finish this study for you. So that's what's happening now. It opened up with a series of charrettes and public workshops a couple of weeks ago, and there will be ongoing public input. So I want to reassure everybody in this room, and if you can pass it on to anybody that's asking, flood walls are not imminent. These floodgates is not something that's necessarily even going to be part of the plan. What we are looking at ways to protect our coastline, be it higher and wider beaches, be it enhanced dune structures. It is any number of those types of things. But the Corps will bring to the table a series of recommendations and options, and the county will have the ultimate say on whether we move forward with any type of partnership or whether we say, thank you for all of the information, and we're going to take it and put it on the shelf until a time more appropriate. So stay tuned. This is just the very beginning of a long process. But speaking of the dunes, and let's talk about Hurricane Ian and what happened to the dunes. Why is this so timely? And let me back up for a second and say, is we owe it to our community to at least listen to the Corps. This is 3 years and $3 million of their money. Now that would be 6 years and $6 million. I can't believe in this second phase that they're going to just come back and tell us exactly what they told us before. And after what we've been through as a community, we need all of the ideas and all of the expertise to be brought to the table so that we at least can evaluate what's best for our community and how we protect ourselves. Our dune structures were wiped out by Hurricane Ian, but they did their job. And that's very important. So we'll continue to look at those things, and we'll continue to look at how mangroves come into play in this process and what things we can do to protect our coastline. No one's going to be excluded. Private beaches will have the opportunity to not only participate, but to cost share if that's appropriate. So there will be no one left out of this. And the county will continue to reach out to our partners and involve them. We are inviting everybody into this process, so stay tuned for further opportunities for public input. Speaking of Hurricane Ian, so what's the difference between what happened in Collier County and what happened in Lee County? The building code. Collier County was lucky, number one, because we took less of the brunt of the storm somewhat than Lee County. But when you look at Fort Myers Beach, the thing that is most striking is that Fort Myers Beach was still pretty old Florida. A lot of old cottages, a lot of structures from anywhere from the 40s, probably up into now modern times. And those structures, the modernized ones, fared okay. But all of those old, charming, wonderful cottages and the low-lying structures were devastated, or they're gone. Collier County, which has a lot of modern construction up and down our coast, fared well. And even at the worst, when we went up to Barefoot Beach and looked at what went on up there, it became very clear that while devastating, that the building code did its job. That structures with the breakaway walls or with the flood vents did what they were supposed to do. So I have to stand here and tell you that it is such a testament to this community that we have been as diligent as we have with requiring adherence, strict adherence to these codes. And while losing the old charm, and that is, it's hard. It is really hard, but this is a hostile environment. Mother Nature is quite willful in what she wants to do when she moves water around. No modern stormwater system in the world would have done anything to stop that water coming in. Floodgates perhaps maybe would have minimized it, but water pushed into places that we did not expect it. And those are the areas that are struggling, and we're still working to get our arms around that. So while the coast is recovering well in light of what's happened, we have areas like Bayshore and Brookside that are still evaluating what their future is going to look like. And so we're working our way through that. We are continuing to work our way through permanent repair projects to our beaches, our beach parking garages, and to other county facilities, looking at probably upwards of $350 million in permanent work that is going to be completed. Stormwater debris removal is ongoing now. Landside debris removal went well. I think we all were really surprised and happy about how smooth that was. Very different storm than Hurricane Irma, for those of you that were here. Hurricane Irma put vegetative debris all over this county to an extent that I had never seen before. While Ian almost was a tale of two storms. We had some vegetative debris out in the eastern parts of the county, but just massive amounts of what we call C&D, construction and demolition debris, that littered the coast and some of those areas that were impacted by storm surge. So what does that mean for us going forward? Well, hurricane season's 2.5 weeks away? Yep. So already kind of planning lessons learned on how and what we would do differently. But also, one reason why we responded so well and so quickly is because we had those strategic reserves for this type of event. And so that is going to be a heavy emphasis in budget this year. Is we've depleted a lot of those reserves, is building those reserves back so that we're prepared to respond to these emergencies. Because FEMA comes in eventually, but that first push, that first period of time, and sometimes for years afterwards, the county is shouldering the burden of that cost until we get through the reimbursement process. So that's that's something that we have to be cognizant of. It's easy to say that we want to have lower taxes. We do enjoy a relatively low millage rate here. Now, that is in part because of our very high property values. But last year we faced, a discussion about rolling the millage rate back, and that $40+ savings. we had calculated a benefit to, oh. Song. Yes, I was going to break out into song. You don't want me to sing or dance. That would be really, you'd be traumatized. Okay, well, I'll just talk louder. So that $40-ish reduction to people's taxes for those homesteaded properties here in Collier County for about a $500,000 home would have been nice, but would have been not so nice when we were sitting here looking at all of the ways that we were going to have to fund hurricane response. I can tell you our positioning in Hurricane Ian versus where we were in Hurricane Irma. I was in stormwater during Hurricane Irma, and we rated nearly every single one of my capital projects to be able to fund what we needed to do in Hurricane Irma. We did not face that in Hurricane Ian. So we'll be looking at that and having these conversations as we move forward into this budget year. So I'm going to take a pause here and see if anybody has any questions about Hurricane Ian response, any of that before we could move on. Maybe we want to talk briefly about what's going on out there with growth and affordable housing. Yep. Oh, it's okay. Hi. Okay. Hi. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And how do we define or how do we compute what those impact fees are? Because that community stands to make a lot of money. And the rest of us that live around there are going to be the recipients of extra traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of
Sure.
things that bring it into that community.
Sure. So you have a specific question about the how we develop the impact fees?
Yes.
Okay. So the impact fee program, each of the components are developed to look at what I'll call a bite of growth or a bite of capacity is taken by that development. So it may be a house or a restaurant, or in this case, a resort. And so there are the impact fees are calculated based on not only the cost of infrastructure, the demand created by that new construction, as well as any other funding that we're putting into the program that's used for the same purpose. The reason why is we can't, there's all sorts of case law and statutory requirements that you can't double charge a developer. So if we're using infrastructure sales tax is a great example. For the amount of infrastructure sales tax that goes into any growth projects, we have to calculate a credit against the impact fees for those dollars. So that comes up with basically the impact fees that are charged for new development. That's across 12 categories. And within those categories, for example, the road impact fees, there's 60 plus categories of different road impact fees that are assessed, from single family homes to restaurants to hotels, anything you can imagine, more fast food restaurants. There's a category for just about anything. Some impact fees are only charged on residential. Things like parks and schools are residential only, where others are charged to both. Now, the tricky thing is redevelopment. So the beach club, for example, it will only be charged impact fees to the extent that it's exceeding the demand created by what was there before. Because again, you have to avoid that double charge. So we would calculate what was there before, which was the beach club hotel, its hotel rooms and that, and whatever is being added on top of that, either by square footage or by room, depending on what fee we're talking about, they'd be required to pay. So there's heavy analysis that goes into all of that, and then those fees are collected. The other thing that goes on the operational side of the house in the county, and I only speak to the county on this one, is that the operational impacts, when new developments are coming in, the operational impacts are also analyzed. So that's the traffic that will burden the existing roads, intersections, and things like that, so that oftentimes there's a proportionate share that's required from that development to pay for things like turn lanes or signal upgrades, intersection improvements. There's a lot of conversation about that particular topic with the villages out to the east. Easy to understand, a whole bunch of new houses and new other stuff, multiply that times the impact fees that we charge, and you get that growth component. But what about the existing? What about the impacts to the existing infrastructure? And so that's where these operational calculations come into play.
And is that a one-time impact fee or is it?
Yep, impact fees. Nope. So it's based on the total amount of the development. So if it's a house, it's a one-time fee on that house. But if something is built in phases, there are ways that the impact fees would be collected as it's constructed. Impact fees are assessed at building permit and collected at CO. So that money comes in and then is spent on projects that are related to growth.
And where do you see 41 and Gulf Shore going?
Well,
I mean, I filled out a survey and never got any response, and that was 4 years ago.
yeah.
And they're still talking about it.
So there's a lot of conversations about infrastructure and the balancing of growth and its impacts on infrastructure. Some of the difficulties is you're in a built environment, particularly when you're getting into the urban area of Collier County or into the cities, both Marco and the city of Naples. Even if we wanted to, which that's another question, is do you want to? But even if you could have the political will or the people's will to do it, you don't have the right of way to expand roads. But that's balanced against people's property rights. And it's a very delicate balance because people have the right to develop their property, and particularly in a redevelopment scenario. So where we see this going is getting smarter about how we manage our traffic, getting smarter about our intersections. That's where we have the most opportunity, is to really enhance the way that the intersections perform and to keep the traffic moving. And then on the other side of the house, of course, is making sure that we have resilient infrastructure. So that's the other piece of this, is that the infrastructure has to be able to weather storms, as well as be able to perform under conditions, heavy seasonal population, things like that. It's complicated, not just in the city, but where you live, but also, in the county. Answer is always to push things to the east, but development to the east stresses the infrastructure to the west, because all of that traffic comes in and just stresses what's already stressed. Sure.
Speaking of east, so I'm set to close on a home in Golden Gate Estates.
Mm-hmm.
From a real estate perspective, the amount of new construction out there is overwhelming. When it comes to 75 and that stretch, the Alligator Alley part that is, parallel to that Golden Gate area, there's always talk and rumors, or it's been in discussion for years and years and years. So I've heard, is there any realistic plan to open up 75 to that DeSoto Boulevard, Everglades Boulevard South, to help with that population increase for that stretch of Golden Gate Boulevard that is just a 2-lane road all the way
Yep.
down and out? Is there anything in the making with that area?
The commissioner of the district has aggressively pursued that I-75 Everglades interchange for as long as he's been in the seat. That's Commissioner McDaniel. Yes, they're making some progress in those conversations. There's been reluctance, number one, because of the properties surrounding that Everglades Boulevard intersection area, I-75, of not wanting it to turn commercial. So there have been some conversations about how to protect that corridor from then commercial development. But also a lot of this hinges on how the road network to the east develops to give the state and federal governments some comfort in how this interchange will perform. So it has not fallen off the radar. In fact, I would say that at least the conversations continue on and are becoming more positive. Will it be in the near future? Probably not. But is it absolutely off the table? No. Oh, I say near future, 5 years. 10 years, could we be further along into some kind of planning study? I think so. It's definitely been something that's been out there. As you said, when I was a kid, it was actually open. So that's kind of interesting that it got closed. But it's one of those things that it needs a pretty heavy legislative push. And I think you're going to get critical mass out there with the people that perhaps are going to be able to help push that along. Yeah.
Where is Collier County on widening of Old 41?
I believe, and I can get your name and get back to you on that. Widening of Old 41. I believe that may be in one of our planning documents for widening. Let me get your name.
Mm-hmm. There was much made of it last year, and it was supposed to be resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
In April, but nothing. And I was just wondering where we were.
Yeah, let me check in with our transportation folks and get you an update on that. I can't tell you where they are in timing, but I would be happy to get back to you on that. Absolutely, I'll give you my card, and that way we can touch base. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I don't know how much more time we have, but perhaps we want to talk really quickly about affordable housing, since that seems to be a pretty hot topic. Golden Gate Golf Course, what's going on there as it layers into this conversation. So we're still getting our arms around some of the legislation that passed this year out of legislative session. This Live Local Act, what does it mean to us? How is it going to be applied? And does it mean that a developer would just be able to go build a 20-story building at, 192 units an acre or whatever that one is at the Metropolitan? That's not the exact numbers, but the specific development I'm referring to is the Metropolitan on the corner. It's at the Triangle, Davis and 41 intersection. That's the tower that's under construction now. That is the tallest and highest density at this time under construction, and whether or not the Live Local Act and some of those provisions would apply to that for within a mile radius, and would that be able to be used as the density? It's 92, it's not 192, it's 92 units an acre, and 160 feet tall. But that is unclear at this time. What we do know is there's probably going to be more density by right, to the extent yet to be determined because of interpretations of zoning. Does this mean it's straight commercial C1 to C4? Would it include mixed use? Yet to come, more to come on that. We do know that there's an affordable housing project, partially affordable housing, but the Haven, that's been in the news probably a little bit, Airport Road, Orange Blossom area, proposal for over 300 units, about 23 units an acre there, 330-ish units going in there with about a 22 or 23% commitment to affordable housing. Heavy opposition. So stay tuned. That's actually scheduled for the Board of County Commissioners on May 23rd, so at their next board meeting. But it's really difficult to strike a balance, because the truth is that nobody does this for free, and they don't do it to take a loss. So how do you balance the appropriate amount of density with a developer being able to make the project work financially? And that's really the big question. Golden Gate Golf Course is moving along. We ran into some difficulties on the Golden Gate Golf Course. For those of you that don't know, the county bought that golf course a number of years ago with the intent of using it for some senior housing, some workforce housing, a veterans nursing home, and then an entertainment complex. Ran into some difficulties just through the zoning process. We were the first ones out of the gate on the golf course conversion process. We were guinea pigging it with ourselves, which was a really exciting endeavor. And also just dealing with the old remnants of a golf course, which you can imagine that a golf course that had been a golf course since the late 60s has a number of things that have to be dealt with. But that project is 100% affordable, both components, the senior portion as well as the workforce portion. It does have a large local commitment from the Community Foundation and Moorings Park, but it is heavily, heavily, heavily subsidized by the county, by state and federal funds. So to make these projects work, it requires either, again, density and market rate units to be able to subsidize the affordable units, or it requires layers and layers of incentivization by other sources, which typically is, again, state, federal, and local funds. And it's really the only two ways these things work. Now, of course, the burning question for everybody is, I don't think anybody in this room denies that we need people here that can work. And them living here is the best opportunity for us and for them. But how much of a role does government play? And that is it's a tough question. Can we make it easier for people to build so that it doesn't take so long? Yes, and we have. Can we look at streamlining processes? Yes, we can. Can we look at local incentivization to the extent that it's appropriate? Yes, we have, and yes, we will. But government is not the only factor here that is causing this. This is a highly desirable place to live, as we all know. It's why we're all here. It's very expensive to live here. The one thing that's made this time more difficult for us, and the solution remains unclear. Last housing situation that we had back in the mid-2000s, not a good solution, but still a solution we had in our toolkit was, well, you could rent. Well, we all know what's happened to rents. You can't really rent because everything is luxury, and even those things that are regular are out of reach. The other tool we used was, well, you can live in Lee County or live in Bonita or live in Estero, and they're experiencing the same thing as us. This phenomenon with rents is very, very unusual and very difficult to get our arms around because, again, it's not government intervention is not necessarily the solution. So we continue to look for ways to partner. Continue to look for opportunities. We do have $20 million of surtax from the infrastructure sales tax that is earmarked for procurement, for purchase of land for affordable housing. So that's that criteria for how somebody may apply to have land purchased under that program is working its way through the process. It'll be going to the surtax committee and then to the board ultimately for their approval. And each of those land acquisitions would be taken to the board. But it's a long process. Anybody that thinks that this is easy is it's not an easy process. We, with our own project, have struggled. And so that is something that we need to focus on and look at all of the ways to bring our partners to the table. And with that, I'll stop for a second and see, because I'm sure this is a topic you all might have some questions on. Ooh, okay. So what happens if we don't have affordable housing? Well, I'll say workforce housing because it goes beyond affordable housing. I mean, we're getting into our workforce. We're getting into our doctors and nurses. We're hearing about people that can't, teachers, firefighters, paramedics that can't find places to live. Well, so all the things we do won't cease to exist. They just will become more and more and more expensive. And that is a problem for all of us. So when we have to start to outsource things because we can't get people that want to live here and be employed by us, we're going to be forced to all methods of, contracting and outsourcing, driving up cost. When we can't get people to work in restaurants and things like that, that starts to really impact our quality of life. So this is a widespread problem with a ripple effect across what we see here as our quality of life. So I'm not minimizing the importance of getting our arms around this. I'm simply saying that this is an us problem, us collectively as a community, us collectively as a region, really. And not just a government problem. It's easy to look at the government and say, well, okay, what can you do? Frankly, we could step out of the way and tell developers, okay, here you go. Go do whatever you want and you can do it for free. But they still have to be able to make it work financially. And also is that we have to want it. And so I think that's the other thing that as a community we can come together on and really be clear on what we tolerate and what we don't. Because the things have to be built someplace. And again, cautionary tale is to the east is not the solution yet. Now, housing in the east definitely becomes a solution as we build out in the east. But so long as everything in the West is what people need. This is where the jobs are. This is where the services are. This is where everything is. If you push our workforce to the East, it only just brings them to the West to do everything. So once that commute can turn around a little bit and you get some critical mass to the East, you'll see some balancing here, and then the ability to place more housing, more affordable housing, more workforce housing out to the East. But until such time that we have jobs out there, it will just crush the infrastructure more than we're already experiencing. So it's a real balancing act. I can't tell you that I have the solutions here, but I will tell you that there's a good conversation going on throughout the community with interested parties, with stakeholders, with our partners that are the major employers. We're all struggling. So I'll stop again and see if anybody has any questions on this before maybe we want to talk just a little bit about traffic. Okay. Oh, sure.
What is the biggest barrier for affordable housing? Is it opposition or?
I think it's two things. It's cost, land. So availability of land is one, because land's very, very expensive here. And if you can develop it easier for market rate, you don't want to go through the trouble and the cost of developing it to affordable housing. But there is the oppositional factor. I think we still hang on a little bit to the stigma that affordable housing is, it's dirty, it's crime-ridden, it's ugly, it's going to bring down our property values. And I think that's starting to ease, but you do still see that rise up a little bit. It takes different forms too, which is interesting. So when you see the evolution of the arguments will be things like, well, we'll start with traffic. The argument for everything is traffic. We don't want any more traffic. And if it's proven out that it's not going to create more traffic, or that the traffic can be managed by the existing infrastructure, then we'll jump to something like water quality. So it's always sort of the specter that's behind the scenes, but it's not always articulated. And that's, I think, where we as government can do a better job getting out into groups and explaining what this project is and what it isn't. And it's the tolerance for density, honestly. We have to figure out where we can appropriately place density, where it fits with the character of the community, where it fits with the infrastructure, and where it's not going to create havoc, so that you can get that balance, but also provide that tool to the developer to be able to develop property. And so that's activity centers and things like that get talked about. Classic example is up on the corner of Pine Ridge and Goodlet. They did work that apartment complex back in there, high-end luxury apartment complex where the old Sweet Bay was. And it has fit in there nicely. And I don't think it's nearly caused the traffic catastrophe that it was portrayed to. And it's not an eyesore. But again, it's a luxury apartment complex, so it didn't really do anything to help our workforce issues. And that's the other balance, is that got a whole lot of luxury apartments being built. And they've got little commitments of 20 units here and 20 units there, and every unit helps. But it's really trying to get some critical mass going on bigger chunks of housing that's restricted to the workforce or to affordable housing.
What about the adaptive reuse of existing empty buildings that don't seem to sell, or just sitting there, that are in the way?
I love that idea so much. We talk about that a lot. I actually had been looking at the old Kmart on Golden Gate Parkway, which turned into a Planet Fitness, but there's still a space over to the side. What's so great about that? Well, you could go up a couple stories. You could keep retail or offices on the bottom. And what's really, really great about old shopping centers and old retail is they have tons of parking. So you're not getting into that jam of how you're going to cram all of this stuff into a small site. That's the most amazing idea, and thank you. It's finding a partner. So that particular piece of property at the time, they wanted $75 million for it. So, and the owner of that property is notoriously difficult to negotiate with. So that one kind of fell off. But yeah, I think where we have to be positioned, as the market changes, and it will, that we have to be positioned for those opportunity buys and those opportunity partnerships to be more creative and to look at, like what you're saying. And the same thing as this Live Local Act starts to show itself is, there probably are commercial properties that are at the end of their useful life, have fallen into, they're empty or they're in disrepair, and looking at how you integrate those to be mixed use. We love mixed use. It's a great use of property. And the other thing is not everything has to be 92 units an acre. When we start to, it may be that we start to do this in small chunks. And that's okay too, as you integrate that into the landscape. And as we get better and more comfortable at this, I think there's a way forward. It's just very slow to start and quite painful.
With affordable housing, you have younger people coming with kids.
Mm-hmm.
What about the impact on schools? Like, I know you guys got to be thinking about that. Where are we going to build the new schools?
Yep. So we work closely with the school district on these growth patterns, and they participate every year in the AUIR, so that we can really, look at how all of this happens. Out east, there was heavy analysis. It's required out in the rural land stewardship area, but there's heavy analysis on, yeah.
So we actually just did our capital plan on Tuesday. There's 2 sites for elementary schools that we're planning to open. One in 24 and one in 25 out in Ave Maria. So
Yep.
those are 2 elementary schools that we're probably gonna have to do another middle school, probably another high school. They originally said in the next 10 years. We're thinking actually more like the next 5. But just like it's on the capital plan, 2 more elementary schools. So sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, it's no problem. And the process out in the rural lands also requires that analysis as towns are developed. They have to consider and provide potentially school sites. So that's an interactive process between the developers as well as the county and the school district.
So the apartment complex, the high end on Boothwood Road extension that borders my neighborhood in Pine Ridge Estates, wasn't that originally pitched toward affordable housing for teachers, firemen, et cetera, nurses?
Not to my recollection, but I can't tell you that they might not have ever spun it that way. The entire time that I dealt with it, which actually predates my time in this seat and the seat prior, it was always geared towards luxury, so much so that they actually they went through a process to look at their impact on the school system for their impact fees, saying that it was going to not be geared towards people with children.
Okay.
Yep.
Very expensive.
Very expensive.
Our neighborhood thought it was going to be, for people that needed to have a local place, but it ended
No.
up being so high-end that nobody could afford it.
Yes, and that's unfortunate because honestly, it sits on a piece of property that's very near a lot of schools, near services and jobs and every other thing that you could possibly imagine. Truly ideal placement for workforce, but of course, there's money to be made at market rate and plus. Okay. So if you'd like, I don't know, are we out of time? We're out of time. Okay, I was going to say if there's any other questions. Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here.